Hi everyone, Tilda here. Over the past few years, I have gone through let's call it a string of consecutive discoveries about myself. I learned that I really like cartoons, I learned that I'm actually pretty good at drawing, and I learned that people actually do pay attention to me online in greater numbers than I could have possibly imagined. And now I've also started voice training. This is the first video where I'm using my new sort of girl voice. I mean, it's at least sort of where I want it to be, I'm still working on it. It's really hard to make my voice sound feminine without making it sound like I'm making fun of women. I've got to start somewhere, right? Anyway, all of those realizations that I've had over the years have made me an entirely different person than I was 4 years ago. Before that point, I didn't really have anything going for me. I was one of those people who just browsed social media and constantly agonized over the prospect of the world ending. I remember legitimately worrying that the United States was going to accidentally nuke itself, or that a huge volcanic eruption would block out the sky and suffocate all life on Earth. And the only real interest I had was video games. And I didn't even like video games. It just so happened that video games were the only place outside of school where I could sort of prove my worth. And when I say I didn't like video games, I mean I didn't like multiplayer games. Single-player games are pretty good. I've recently played through Deltarune Chapters 1 and 2 and Celeste, and those have been quite fun. I also really used to enjoy making custom maps for Portal, and playing that game over and over until I could beat it in under half an hour. I like single-player games, but I don't like the unpredictable nature of online gaming. What if my internet connection suddenly dies, and I inconvenience everyone in the match? What if the character I want to play gets taken and I have to play someone else? What if everyone collectively decides to intentionally throw the match? What if one of the people in the game takes out all their frustration on me? What if they force me into a conversation? Especially in games with a voice chat feature. I don't want to talk to people, but I do enjoy the idea of online competitive gaming. I like watching other people play. And there was a point relatively recently when I realized that it's totally fine to watch games without playing them. All your knowledge of the game can simply be there just to make the experience of watching someone else more engaging. And that's enough for me. I still watch Dota 2 streams on Twitch occasionally. That game is definitely better watched than played, at least for me. I was kind of rambling there, but I guess the point of that is, I used to be a gamer like you, doing nothing with myself. I have a history of anxiety and depression. If you're watching this, you might have anxiety and/or depression yourself. I've heard it's pretty common for people. I have also had anxiety and gotten depressed about the idea of so many people having anxiety and depression. Wow, isn't that funny? I'm kind of an anxious empath. I worry about the well-being of other people that I don't even know. But the catch is that it's not really that helpful kind of empathy. It's actually very awful and paralyzing, because the internet lets you know exactly what other people's problems are, and you don't really have control over what information you take in, at least if you're just following random people on Twitter, or scrolling through random Reddit or Tumblr threads. In order to be a stable human being, you actually have to limit how much you care about people in the world. And paradoxically, once you start doing that, it's actually easier to care about people genuinely, in a way that you can actually cope with, and that actually helps other people. But how did I, a nobody like you, who didn't draw, who had awful anxiety, who still struggles a little with anxiety, who used to have little to no drawing experience, how did I learn how to draw? How did I get my life together? How am I so perfect? Well, first of all, I'll state the obvious. No, I'm not perfect. Nobody is perfect. What's happening is that you're seeing the heavily edited version of me. You're seeing all the art that I've made. You think I'm the goddess of furry Twitter or whatever. You comment, "Teach me your ways." And I actually got a comment from someone in my Discord where they mentioned that, like the title says, they couldn't even draw stick figures. Now, stick figures are notoriously easy to draw. It's a circle with a few lines. And if you're even remotely interested in drawing, even if you somehow don't know how to draw stick figures, you can learn. It probably wouldn't even take that long to learn. I mean, I don't know whether or not you have some kind of motor function disorder or paralysis or whatever, but most people can pretty easily learn how to draw stick figures. So why do some people make the comment about how they can't even draw stick figures? Well, I don't claim to be an expert on human behavior, but there does seem to be a sort of habitual ritual. Wow, I didn't realize we were dropping bars here. But there's sort of a habit certain people online seem to have, where they elevate other people and place themselves as being lower than dirt. And I suppose the reason they do that is, well, self-esteem issues. I don't know if I really need to explain that. People with low self-esteem tend to put themselves down. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. But as someone who has like a fair amount of social anxiety that I'm still trying to work on, it's weird being on the other side of the coin, where people you've always assumed were somehow better than or above you, coming to you and telling you that they're no good losers, and that you're famous, and they wish they were more like you. And it's gotten to the point where I'm just used to being amazing by default, by virtue of the fact that I happen to consistently put maybe a little more effort into my art than the average person, because it's something that I like to do and that I'm passionate about. I've gotten into the habit of trying with my art. I've gotten used to making art pieces that I'm not completely happy with, but I'm nevertheless glad that I put in the effort, and now I have just a little bit more to show for myself. And yes, I'm aware that I'm actually quite good at what I do. What you're saying is very real, but like, when I talked about how I'm a girl, I didn't just decide to be a girl one day. I went through a lot of self-doubt. It took almost the entire year to finally accept my identity and also do something about it. And to be honest, I still don't really know the extent of my identity, like what it encompasses. The funny thing about being transgender is that you constantly have this feeling that you're not actually trans, and all those emotions that you went through were somehow not real. So I had to learn how to consider two conflicting viewpoints, make a decision based on those viewpoints, and most importantly, commit to that decision. And I decided to rebrand my YouTube channel towards something a whole lot more pink and girly because I like girly things. A lot. I've also noticed that I really like drawing women, and not just because they're sexy or whatever. I identify with them, to the point where I've only given elaborate backstories to the women, and the male characters are just sort of there to be eye candy. I mean, the women are also there to be eye candy. It's just that there's a backstory behind why they conveniently decided that they wanted to be a sexy lesbian stripper squirrel or whatever. So the thing that motivated me to start drawing was self-discovery. I discovered that I had a desire, deeper than anything I had ever felt before, to express myself. Up to that point, I had established myself as being the kind of person that blends in, that doesn't make themselves known, that just sort of quietly exists in the corner and doesn't do anything. It's actually affected my biology somewhat. I literally don't burp. I just quietly exhale gas in the most inconspicuous way possible. And while I was doing voice training, I realized that I already had a super soft, smooth voice, possibly due to all the time I spent trying to be quiet and unobtrusive, which made that whole process a lot easier than I expected. All I had to do was work on my resonance and pitch and stuff, and I was already way farther along than I expected to be. So it turned out that I was able to turn a disadvantage into a strength. And I guess that's all well and good for me, your mileage may vary, but the point is, it helps to not think of yourself as a screw-up by default. There's this thing called self-hatred, which, depending on who you are, is likely quite familiar to you. And then there's like self-worship or narcissism, which is equally harmful. But the thing about self-hatred and narcissism is that they are both way too focused on the self. Now obviously, since you're stuck in your brain for as long as, well, however long your brain ends up functioning, I'm not going to claim to know how consciousness works. This could all very well be a simulation, like, I don't know, some weird quantum shit is probably happening. But anyway, I'm getting extremely off topic. Since you're stuck in your brain, you focus on yourself a whole lot more than other people focus on you. So what I would suggest to you is self-indifference, which is a concept other people have brought up. I didn't invent it. But what you want to do is just say to yourself, I exist. I have a body. I do things sometimes. And sometimes people notice those things. Oh look, here's a stick figure. I'm not claiming to be an artist, but clearly the fact that I can draw a stick figure means something. And that balance of emotion, that balance of thoughts will carry you through your entire artistic career. Well, I finished this drawing of Garfield as a goth girl. I recognize that this is one of the most cursed things in existence, but hey, she's kinda cute. This drawing isn't amazing, but I am acutely aware of the fact that the vast majority of people online are not going to notice anything wrong with it, even if my artist brain might overemphasize its alleged flaws. It's like that's what you end up doing. It's pretty good. It's not that great. It exists. And believe it or not, there are moments where I make something I'm actually taken aback by how good it is. And usually what happened there is I took a risk and pushed myself a bit harder than I usually do. I recently made a 3D model of, yes, another goth girl. The internet loves goth girls, and I am to please. But it's a model of Judy Hopps where she has ear piercings and a spike collar and striped leggings and all that good shit. And everyone loved it. Ashley Nichols retweeted it, since it's her character idea, and I added her on Twitter. But what happened there was I took the initiative. I said to myself, this is something I want to do. I'm not completely sure if I'll be able to do it, but I'm at least 75% confident it'll work out. And the thing is, since I have artist vision, which I cultivated through years of saying yes to myself and continuing to press forward with my artistic journey. I mean, it's not like I had anything else going on. But since I had the proper attention to detail, I was able to correct myself whenever I made a mistake. And I tried my best, and my best ended up being way more than enough. Enough for everyone to start simping for me. Alright, that's probably not the right word to use, but hey, what can I say? I'm just so fucking sexy and talented, I can't help it. Now I get it. I am privileged to have been using Blender on and off for many years and to already know the ins and outs of the program before I even started drawing. But you can also start using Blender, and you actually have an advantage over me, assuming you're motivated enough to learn. Yes, I've been using Blender longer than you, probably, but you're actively learning. Well, I spent most of my Blender years just dicking around, putting reflective test monkeys on flat planes. It wasn't until I started drawing that I realized that my artistic skill with drawing transferred over to Blender and made it that much easier to create appealing characters. So whatever you're doing, stick with it, and the skills you learn from that thing will transfer over to other things, sometimes in ways you don't expect. Like, learning to draw didn't just teach me how to draw sexy catgirls. It taught me how to self-advocate, because once I realized that I was talented and capable and skilled, I was able to transfer that self-advocacy into other spaces where it's kind of necessary to survive and cultivate a brand. And it's funny because I was so caught up in my art journey that whenever someone would say, "Yo, you're so good, how'd you do that?" I would almost get taken aback and be like, "Oh yeah, most people's standards for what makes super good art are lower than I expected." No offense to anyone, of course. I would imagine your standards are super high, which is why you only look at the highest quality entries on e621.net. I presume that you are a very cultured individual. I guess the moral here is that you know that feeling when you finally made it as an artist, and all of your art is perfect, and everyone loves you, and you can draw whatever you want, and it all comes out perfectly. That feeling isn't gonna come. You're pretty much always going to be a confused mess. The thing that people like me do is that we develop the ability to trick people into thinking we're talented. I mean, I don't know about anyone else, but I at least can recognize my legitimate talent. But emotionally speaking, it does feel kind of fake. Becoming moderately successful online has taught me a lot about what it is to exist in this world. It's a game of faking it until you make it. You essentially become a con artist, whose goal is to manipulate yourself to the top. You put on a facade of being this amazing, skilled individual who's super fucking valid, and everyone believes it. And they reinforce you. They actually help you with your scheme. Because here's the thing, if your quote-unquote scheme is to better yourself, make more people like you, realize your potential, and become the best version of yourself, then it's not really a scheme so much as it is just being a successful person. I mean, in my case, it's a bit of a scheme. I literally tricked YouTube into giving me money just from putting googly eyes on an owl. But I also happen to be a somewhat successful and interesting person on the side. So when I started drawing, I actually remember how I felt at first. I was like, yeah, blah blah, this drawing's not that great, I'm terrible, whatever. But it's actually not that bad. And the realization that it wasn't that bad made me excited to continue. I realized that I had potential, and I couldn't wait to see what else I could do. And the funny thing is that my first drawing was of Bugs Bunny. I don't know how often I've brought up the Bugs Bunny drawing. Maybe I've mentioned it in some of my videos. You know, the ones that no one's actually watched, that I've unlisted. But the point is, my first drawing was the least original thing in the world. A cartoon character that already exists, just standing there. And I was actually doing this the hard way. I was against tracing at the time. I figured everything I drew had to at least have an original pose. But you don't even have to do that. You can just copy, line for line, a pre-existing image. If I had done that, my first drawing probably would have been much better, even though it wouldn't have technically been my drawing. Because at this stage, it's really about getting your foot in the door, through any means necessary. You can worry about originality later. You just need to get your head in the game and realize that not only can you draw stick figures, you can draw so much more, you can be so much more, and in many ways, you already are so much more. So much more than you even realize. And I cannot stress enough how common these self-esteem issues are in society. Everyone thinks that they're the exception, that they're the only person on the planet who doesn't have value. And once you realize that everyone thinks that, or at least a fair amount of people think that, then you'll realize that it's all just a big trick, and you'll hopefully start to get motivated to con people into liking you. And I don't mean emotionally abuse or neg them. I don't believe in that. I mean, start convincing yourself that you're actually super great. Start telling yourself that you have value and that you're worth it and that you're a supermodel and you're so sexy and everyone wants to lay you or whatever. And then you can start bringing it back down like, I'm actually admittedly kind of average. I'm interesting, but I'm not that interesting. And then you just sort of work on leveling yourself out. I'm not perfect, but I'm pretty good. And that's where the whole self-indifference thing comes in. I mean, the very least you can do is tell yourself that you can draw stick figures. Even if it feels like a lie, it won't be once you start getting into it. And sometimes you have to get used to feeling like an idiot. I get it, talking like this into a microphone feels kind of silly. But if you feel like an idiot anyway, you might as well feel like an idiot while working on something. Anything. The whole world is stupid. You might as well learn to live with stupidity. It'll help you discover things about yourself. The point of life isn't to never mess up. The point is to learn about yourself and be the best version of yourself. And I'll bring up the classic saying, you can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs. The goal of your existence isn't to never break anything, it's to make a fucking omelet. And while you're breaking eggs and making omelets, you might as well start trying to make the best goddamn omelet in existence. And even if you fall short, at least you're miles ahead of where you started. So go out there and break eggs, draw stick figures, make a complete fool of yourself, and then stand there in shock as everyone just kind of lets you do it. Yes, the world doesn't care about you, but that means that it doesn't care about your mistakes. And if it doesn't care about your mistakes, then what's the point in worrying about your mistakes? Mistakes are an important, universal part of growth. And if nobody cares about your mistakes, then you're all set to just continue improving with no judgment. And you'll eventually get to the point where you can look back on how far you've come and realize that your existence is a blessing, and that the world kind of needs you to exist because you're the only one who can do what you do the way that you do it. And you might not realize that you've reached that point because you'll already have gotten used to yourself, which is why it's important to start thinking objectively about yourself, which means realizing the good that you've done and the progress that you've made. Remember those moments where you desperately wanted what you now have, thanks to your tireless efforts to be better today than you were yesterday. And there's probably other people who have said this better, but I don't care. I just wanted to make this because I have a lot of love in my heart. Ooh woo. Thank you all for watching, and remember to stay cute.